So we're glad that Faith is involved, that Reverend Mandy is involved in trying to help find children, assisting in, they found, but it's not just children that are abducted, which leads me to introduce the next individual, Director Keisha Uri. Now, Director Uri is a young lady that has been boots on the ground long before 2009. But her journey started, Reverend Mandy. She's a licensed clinical social worker, practicing trauma-focused cognitive behavioral psychotherapist. That's what she is. She's a community-based trauma specialist who works with victims of violence and crime. She has over 15 years of social work experience, which includes working with at-risk population of youth and adults who are in the criminal justice system and social welfare system. She works with various populations of individuals who are homeless, incarcerated, unemployed, mental health disorders, and substance abuse issues. Not to mention that Director Uri has traveled the walls of academia. She's a chairwoman of the Newark Anti-Violence Coalition, which was founded in 2009 to protest against the senseless violence plaguing the city of Newark. She has raised the awareness across this city, now traveling nationally, trying to let folks know the example that Newark is setting to address these major issues. She's been a dedicated and community activist an organizer over the years. She has a wealth of experience. She has been monumental in helping the city of Newark become a trauma-informed city. How many know that the truth is human trafficking causes trauma? Trauma in the home, trauma with mothers, trauma with fathers, traumas with sisters, the whole family, communities, jobs are affected. This is her specialty. She's been a voice for the voiceless, for advocating support for a legion of residents. There's no way that we could have done this without Lakeisha Uri being a part of it, representing the Office of Violence Prevention, which encompasses many offices. Brick City Peace Collective, they have a multitude of organizations that are combating many, many issues that plague our city. She's pioneering change agent, especially in public health and the public safety arena. Her passion, skills, knowledge, and abilities is one of the reasons why the image of Newark is changing in the right direction, and everybody's watching Newark and how great we're going to be and all the great things we're going to do. I now introduce to you for a brief introduction and statement who will be assisting our People's Assembly senior managers with your Q&A piece when we go to the end after your presentation. Director Uri, it is now in your hands.
Well, I think that she ultimately said everything, so there's not much more for me to say, but thank you so much for having me today to help with the Q&A. Again, everything that she said, born and raised in the city of Newark, doing trauma recovery work, and we now just opened the Office of Violence Prevention and Trauma Recovery. It's going to be on 17th Avenue in the first precinct of the police department, where we are transforming the way that we do things. So a place that was once a place where people were being arrested is now going to be a place for people to be able to heal. And so as we talk today about human trafficking, the trauma, and everything that it causes, I'll help and jump in to present some of the resources that we have to be able to help people in the community.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Director Uri. And I'm sure you have some questions as well already prepared for this, this pastor along with our viewers. Let me say this. I'm going to introduce our senior manager, Andrea Mason, who does so much regarding getting information out across this city. Whatever happens in the city of Newark affects our entire state. The truth of the matter are we are the largest municipality in the state of New Jersey, the largest, which means that one size, I always say, does not fit all. Whatever's happening in Red Bank is Red Bank, but you can't apply Red Bank to Newark because Newark is so large that you can fit some of these other municipalities in it 5, 6, and 7 times, which means things get lost sometimes in the cracks because of the population and because of the size. And that's why an office like the Office of Violence and Prevention and Trauma Recovery is so important with all of the organizations that work with it. And with that being said, I'm going to now turn it over real quick to Sister Andrea Mason, who's going to also introduce herself and talk a little bit about the major work that she does with the Newark People's Assembly.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for allowing me this opportunity to speak. I will not stand before you for long because I am totally interested in the presentation being offered on human trafficking. But my name is Andrea Mason. I serve as the Senior Manager of Newark People's Assembly. And this office serves as the liaison really between the community, specifically the community-based organizations, philanthropic organizations, and the people, community at large, and the municipal government. So basically, it's a lot of community engagement. And for any reason, if you do have questions, concerns, anything that needs to be filtered to administration, as it relates to just how things are being done in the city, please feel free to reach out to my office. The email is best, Newark People's Assembly at ci.newark.nj.us, and I'll leave it there. And you'll see me again when it's time for Q&A. As Reverend Roundtree mentioned, Director Yuri and I will be moderating the Q&A section. See you later. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrea. You are phenomenal, Director Keisha. I love working with these women. As you can see, the Honorable Raz J. Baraka has no issue with empowering women to get things done. Why? Because he knows that we give birth to nations and we're going to get it done. Right, Andrea? We're going to get it done, Reverend Mandy. And we thank him for entrusting us with getting things done and giving us assignments and most assuredly allowing us platforms to reach out, because he is a mayor that believes in getting the word out that's going to help our people by any means necessary. It's about helping one another, assisting one another. And with that being said, I do have to mention our beloved, I did mention Jerry Lee, but I do have to mention the Archdiocese representative, Father Tim Graff, who represents 23 parishes in the city of Newark. I also have to introduce Imam Dawul Haq, our Muslim representative for the Newark Council of Imams, who represents over 14 masjids in the city of Newark, Minister Abdul Haq Muhammad. We have a diverse faith community that works together. It is not we don't sit back and say, well, you're Christian and we can't stand with you. That's not how we roll in the city of Newark. Thanks be to God that it's about the people. And I always say, Reverend Mandy, that my religion is personal, but my mission is humanity. And that is what we stand on with the Newark Interfaith Alliance. We're now going to introduce the young lady of the hour. This program, of course, does not, and let me do a disclaimer, we don't ask for any donations. We don't do anything of that sort. What we do is we ask for help and assistance and getting the word out and sharing information that's going to help our communities strive for doing better, be better, improve the quality of life. And that's why we asked and incorporated the message and the information from Reverend Mandy Bristol Leverett. She is the co-founder and executive director and the nationally appointed AGUSM of CAN, which is the Community Abolition Network that empowers church and community to do abolition, including prevention, detection, action, advocacy, and survivor care. CAN retrofits existing services to serve survivors where no services exist. CAN works collaboratively to create those services. CAN assists with rescues and referrals nationwide, is professionally accredited, and has been invited internationally and appointed nationally to multiply the work of anti-trafficking through the local church and community. Mandy's 30 years of anti-trafficking experience and cross-disciplinary approach inform her additional service as an advisor to the New Jersey Attorney General Human Trafficking Task Force, the former executive director of the New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking, the initiator for the opening of a New Jersey survivor home with Hoving Home, an advocate for the inclusion of existing successful faith-based service providers on state and federal lists, the collaborator to launch a national hotel outreach rescuing mission and trafficking children. She's a member of the National Consortium of Heal Trafficking, an initiator of business partnerships for the reentry training and employment. Mandy's training has reached tens of thousands and have been published in the Teen Challenge National and International Leader curricula, as well as DARE parent trainings, often quoted as saying, "It takes everyone's eyes to find what is hidden in plain sight." Mandy has committed herself to build an army of everyday abolitionists and best practice recovery sources and to reach of every victim that has been missing, that continues to not be able to be found, trying to assist those parents. We have someone on this line, on this Zoom today, that just recently, personally, and it wasn't a form of, when you say human trafficking, abduction is a form of human trafficking to me. It doesn't necessarily mean that you were sold or that you, yes, you were in some form of slavery. But Director Keisha Uri went to South Carolina to assist one of our colleagues that's the co of the Big City Peace Collective. Brother Sharif Amenhotep's daughter was abducted, but it wasn't by strangers. And she was murdered, a 15-year-old. And Director Keisha watched this little girl grow up from a baby. So she's been personally close to her best friend experiencing this. And people don't realize until it hits your backyard how much pain it causes for a child to go missing or someone in your family to go missing. We thank you, Reverend Mandy Leverett, for the work that you do. And we now welcome you to the Newark Interfaith Alliance Office of Violence Prevention, Newark People's Assembly, under the leadership of Raz J. Baraka, our mayor of this great city, to now speak to our listening audience and present what CAN is doing and how they help us. It's in your hands.
Thank you, Reverend Roundtree. And am I muted? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Reverend Roundtree, and everyone that has been mentioned. All these amazing organizations. You guys are doing a phenomenal job, and this is a relevant topic to every community. But like you said, Reverend Roundtree, it's something that hits our hearts, and we have personal experiences with this. So I want to welcome everybody. We have. Can you all see the screen right now? Is it on there? Okay. We're going to launch and start a video, and then we'll start our talk.
You just take a seat. Thank you so much for coming in. I'm Mary, by the way. I'm Mary. Tonight. Nice to meet you. Don't mind the giant microphone above your head. I'll try not to. There are 3 photos in front of you. If you could just pick one, it doesn't really matter which one it is, and show that one to us. All right. Could you describe her to us?
She looks youthful. I feel like this is one of those situations where if I say he's 23, then he's actually going to be 16.
Hispanic, maybe not full, but part. Similar to me, actually.
Well, I mean, she's young, so probably has a lot of things to look forward to.
I would describe him as friendly.
She looks, happy. She doesn't look shy, but confident.
Anything she puts her mind to, she could achieve.
We actually have his story. If you could read that out loud to us.
Okay. Marcus. I grew up really close to my parents. Adriana. I grew up with my brother and sister.
Amy. I remember watching the Olympics on TV when I was 5 and being totally in awe of the sprinters.
I was the middle child and easily the quietest.
I felt like no one ever saw me or cared.
Dad was too drunk to keep a job, and he never
even saw me unless I was in his way.
Mom worked 2 jobs to make sure we had food for every meal, so she was never here to know when he would hit us.
One day when I went to the mall, like I like to do to be out of the house, a man came up to me and told me I was beautiful and asked me on a date.
On our first date, he drove me around in his car and said we could eat whatever I wanted.
Every time we were together, he bought me something new.
Tom really cared about me, and Tom really made me feel special.
I was in love with him.
After only going out for 3 weeks, Tom offered me a way out of my home, asked me to move in with him. So when he asked me to have sex with him, I did.
He would put his hand over my face until I couldn't breathe.
Tom had friends over pretty regularly, and I could tell that some of his friends were into me.
So I kept my door locked and hoped that no one would bother me. After a few nights of crashing there, he said that I still owed him for letting me stay at his place.
He said he had a friend who wanted to spend an hour with me. He told me I might have to do some stuff, but not to worry about it. It's not a big deal.
When I didn't want to, he slapped me and said no one ever cared about me like he did.
But I didn't know what else to do because I needed a place to stay.
His friends forced themselves on me and took turns while he watched.
One by one, they'd come down to the basement, telling me how pretty I am.
When they're on top of me, I just close my eyes and pretend I'm running.
I'm exhausted and I don't know what to do.
My name is Adriana, I'm 16 years old.
My name is Marcus. I'm 14 years old. My name is Amy. I'm 12 years old.
I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
And I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
That was very different than what I thought. Especially because, like, being a girl and imagining, like, if that was me, like, that's, I don't even know. I can't even imagine what that would be like. She deserves to be a kid, just like what she is in this picture.
It being so close to home is something that makes me want to jump out of this chair.
I wouldn't think that Grand Rapids is a place where anything like this would ever happen.
Because you don't want it to happen to anybody. You really don't want it to happen to people that live where you live.
Thank you for sharing her story with us. I'd like to show you something if you wouldn't mind taking her picture and following me to the gym.
This is a representation of the number of children trafficked at any given time in West Michigan alone.
I expected something certainly a lot smaller.
Bar graphs and numbers, and but these are actual people. I don't know. In like my world, in my bubble or whatever, we don't talk about this. It's not something we think about.
You know, what we see is only on the surface.
I mean, looking at this, sex trafficking doesn't have any discrimination, that's for sure. Ages, genders, it can affect anybody. It hits you right in your heart, your gut, your stomach. It's like, wow. Now it's like I feel like I have this weight of responsibility to see how I can help.
Changes through greater awareness and making people realize that this does happen here and will continue to happen until we decide to make a stop.
This is the national hotline number in text. It works in every US state and US territory. Can you all see the PowerPoint? What if I told you that the greatest weapon we have to combat human trafficking is you? Would you believe me? It's true. That's not those aren't my words or my idea. That was actually the words of our former Attorney General, who helped bring us from a failing state in anti-trafficking, according to the national hotline number, to leading the state or leading the nation in anti-trafficking. So this is, they recognized that we have great law enforcement when it comes to our federal response, our state response, and our municipal and county responses. We have specialists that lead in anti-trafficking, but they knew that they need that you are the eyes and the ears on the ground, that the community, the faith community, students, professionals of all kinds. There are indicators specific to every profession. So only you sometimes have the advantage to see something and then report it and use that hotline number, which is very effective. As was mentioned, CAN equips church community to do abolition, including prevention, detection, action, advocacy, and survivor care. We retrofit existing services to serve survivors, and where no services exist, we work collaboratively with all kinds of organizations to create those services. One example is that was mentioned, we helped open a survivor home. A lot of our victims couldn't leave the state because of parole issues or custody issues. So we partnered with an organization that had served the state of New Jersey for over 50 years with over an 80% success rate, the Walter Hoving Home in New York, which is part of the Teen Challenge Network. So this is the one we opened here in New Jersey with them. It's a beautiful location. It's a broad range of life controlling issues approach. They are survivor informed and led. They're an amazing organization. And now we have this resource right here in New Jersey and in a beautiful setting. It's a great place to heal. We're going to talk today about what human trafficking is, what it's not. We're going to cover the two categories of human trafficking, modern day slavery, that is covered by our state and federal law. And then we're going to touch on 4 additional categories that aren't part of that law, but are part of some other laws and are very important for us to understand. First of all, I want to just kind of cover this. If you can see these questions, this is a true or false. We have a lot of graduations happening. We're going back to school right now. So I just wanted you to take a second and just look through those lists. True or false. I'm going to give you the cheat sheet, okay? This isn't a hard test. All of these are false. So there's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to human trafficking. Some are implicit in the name. So trafficking, we think of movement, right? So a lot of people think that, oh, you have to move from, county, state, you have to cross some sort of border, international border for it to be considered human trafficking. Not true. You can be trafficked even while living a normal life at home. And that's a common scenario, actually. It doesn't just happen to international. When we started this work, when our law was passed in 2000, our federal law, the idea was, we thought it was mostly foreign nationals who were brought in under false pretenses and made to work and do sex trafficking. And that's definitely a situation all over the country. But we now know that the majority of victims of human trafficking are own citizens. And so that changes even how we train, how we spot it. And so the building information is important. This is a learning movement. The anti-trafficking movement is a learning movement because we're constantly seeing shifts and change, like Reverend Roundtree mentioned about COVID. So we're constantly learning, constantly adapting. But doing this for a long time, we see this growing awareness and the growing knowledge. Doesn't just happen in big cities, it happens in rural communities and suburbs. And so how it looks is sometimes different from one community to another, from one kind of business to another. It happens in big cities, small cities, all over, in every state. In fact, we don't quote a lot of stats because there is a lack of real solid unified stats for a number of reasons. And the stats we do quote, they do have qualifiers on them, but we really just stick to the things that we have really rung true with the service provision we've done over the years. And that is 83% of victims of human trafficking in the US today are our own citizens. That's a lot of us. And for most of them, it starts between the ages of 11 to 14. That's 5th grade to 9th grade. So when we talk about, prevention all the way to reentry, a full gamut of prevention, to mobilizing community, to building resources, doing outreach, all of these things, we need to understand what the reality on the ground is so we can help identify it, help heal it. So, and the idea is also that it only happens to undocumented. As I mentioned, it's our own citizens as well. One of the issues and concerns is concerning undocumented victims of human trafficking is that they think that they're going to be deported if they report. If you use the national hotline number to reach out for help, our FBI victim specialist will tell you there are more resources available to foreign nationals than to our own citizens. So there's a special T visa just for foreign national victims of human trafficking that is available if you don't have to testify against your trafficker, but if you just tell your story to law enforcement, and additional resources, employment, a pathway to citizenship, all of these resources are available. You don't have to be afraid, but a lot of people are because they for a lot of different reasons, legitimate reasons. We have throughout the nation, we have T visas set aside for this purpose that go unused every year. And so we just want to make sure that people know if you're in a situation where you might be undocumented, you don't have to be afraid to reach out to the National Human Trafficking Hotline number. You can work directly with service providers, or it's a nonprofit, or you can be connected to law enforcement that are specific to human trafficking, that are specialists. So those resources are available to everyone, and anyone can leave a tip or a report anonymously if you want to. So you don't have to be an expert in human trafficking to use that hotline number. A lot of people think, well, I'm not sure if this is actually human trafficking that I'm saying. They would rather you err on the side of caution. Just give the tip, and who knows, it could be part of a mounting investigation. Sometimes one tip may not have enough information that is actionable, but combined with other tips, a lot of times law enforcement are putting things together behind the scenes. So it doesn't just happen when money is transferred. It can be the transfer of goods or services. And so again, that broadens what we're looking for in human trafficking. It doesn't just happen when someone is taken, as I mentioned, or to those who put themselves at risk. It really can happen to anyone. Anyone can be a victim, any age, any situation in life, any economic background, any educational background. We did a rescue for a victim who was flown into New Jersey from another state, and she was boyfriended in, so to speak, and the person she was going to meet her fiance. Well, she got here and it turned out he was a trafficker, and she was so embarrassed because she was a wise, professional woman in her 40s, and she thought, I'm just so embarrassed that I fell for this. They're masters of deception. It really can happen to anyone. And anyone can be a victim of human trafficking. Anyone can be a trafficker, and anyone can be a purchaser. We've had clergy that were all of the above in their past. So these are situations that really, it can be happening to anyone, even while they're attending a congregation, going to school. In fact, we have a growing scenario where middle school students backed by gangs are trafficking other middle school students while they're in school. It's happening in the student bathrooms. So one of the initiatives that we have is to put the human trafficking, 3 hotlines, the human trafficking, the cutting, the suicide hotline number in every student bathroom across America in middle school and high schools. Those are available free. All of the school districts have to do is send in an order, and we mail them directly so that they can post those, one for every student bathroom. And it's a self-rescue piece, because if this stuff is happening there, kids need to know there's help. And so we put that there. Also, there's an idea that human trafficking is easily identifiable. It is not. A lot of times someone that is victimized doesn't know what's happening to them is called human trafficking. Even with all the awareness that we have, even with the movies and the different things, they don't understand it. A lot of times they're groomed in such a way they think they were complicit, or it's their fault. So they're not going to tell on themselves. They feel trapped when actually they're a victim. So it's really important that everyone kind of knows what the indicators are, what the signs are, because sometimes a victim isn't going to always advocate for themselves. You might see something. It's important that you say something. So, and another thing is, if someone is physically bound, people think that we've seen the movies, if someone is taken, we see a lot of chain imagery. Most people are not physically bound. In fact, one of the things that bind people are our cell phones. We use this as a freedom device, but this can become a control device by a trafficker. They're texting every 15 minutes. They know where you are with the GPS. They just all the parental protections that are there. Traffickers can use them to control and track their victims. And if we're thinking about American kids, we think you just call 911, right? Kids know, call 911, get help. But the chains that the trafficker have go beyond physical. In fact, a lot of times they're threats against their family or people they love, and they're real threats. But then for a lot of people, they have this trauma bond called Stockholm syndrome, this grooming process where it's kind of like a brainwashing. If you've ever met someone that has been a victim of domestic violence and they're smart and strong, and yet they keep returning to their victimizer, and that kind of codependent relationship, it almost creates like an addictive personality where you keep going back. That's the kind of thing we see in human trafficking. And the grooming process, it can be someone that's a friend, a boyfriend. The grooming process, it can be subtle. They can meet online or in person, and they're usually really nice at first because they want to garner the favor, and then position them so that they're in between them and their support system. So sometimes they create a Romeo Juliet situation, it's us against the world. And then once they're isolated from their support system, then the breakdown happens, and it looks like abuse, and a moment of kindness, sleep deprivation, starvation, and then a hamburger. So the trafficker, your basic needs aren't getting met. Your ability to make good decisions is altered drastically, and the trafficker is not just the source of bad but good. And so you if you want to eat that day, you do what they say. Then trust forms, and then even a weird twisted kind of love forms, and that's the mental chain that we're talking about. Oftentimes survivors have that mental chain. You can remove someone from a trafficking situation, but that mental chain where sometimes their name has been changed, they've been broken down. Everything that they have as an identity has been broken down. Even the ability to make choices. It is complete mind control. So part of that restoration is identity, is building that person up, learning to make choices again. Very basic things that we don't think about. A lot of times a survivor might be put back into society very quickly without healing in these areas and processing, and then they have to deal with real circumstances, real life circumstances, and then it triggers them in that area of trauma and drives them back, sometimes even to their trafficker. So these are the spaces we think, the answers are simple. They're not simple. And so it's important that we look at the complexity of how this affects everyone. As Reverend Roundtree mentioned, it's not just the victim, it's everyone walks through this trauma together, right? There's secondary trauma. Even if you're not a family member of the individual, you're helping someone, you can be offended for them. And then you have to process the trauma of what you just heard and walked through. So, another myth concerning human trafficking is that telling children about it will rob them of their innocence. The opposite is true. We do trainings direct to students in the schools, middle school to high school, and adults and colleges as well. But when it's younger than that, we do trainings specific for parents and teachers and kids, people that are interacting with children, because children that have been made aware have actually stopped the attempts of traffickers on themselves. They've been using wise tactics in person and online that have helped prevent them from becoming victimized. So we see that we work very carefully with young people, and we help mobilize the community in a safe and appropriate way, even to your profession. As I mentioned, there are indicators specific to every profession, and how a professional builds a response, how a church builds a response is appropriate to their capacity. So human trafficking, the way the law defines it, it is the commercial exploitation of an individual by the use of force, fraud, or coercion. To be considered a human trafficking, a prosecutable crime, it has to include that force, fraud, or coercion, and a commercial meaning the exchange of money, goods, or services. So those pieces have to be proven for law enforcement to prosecute under a human trafficking statute. Typically, when a lot of people, when they talk to like the county liaison for human trafficking, they'll talk about the people they've prosecuted. And sometimes it can be disappointing to the community because you're like, well, I just heard there was a raid and so many people were arrested and people were rescued and that there should be at least that many prosecutions. It's not always that easy when you're trying to prove a case. Sometimes you don't have enough evidence. So what a lot of times what a prosecutor will do is use multiple charges to build up to a minimum of 20 years, which is the minimum for our human trafficking prosecution is 20 years. So we have a very strong law in the state of New Jersey. It mirrors our federal law, but it does, you know, it's difficult sometimes to prove it because a lot of times the survivors won't share because they're still fearful. And so they have to use more circumstantial evidence and other situations. So again, they want to remove the trafficker from this off the streets as long as possible. So sometimes they might use like child endangerment charges or and those kind of like listing them so it can get them off the street for longer times. But it's almost half of the charges for human trafficking throughout the country are dropped every year. So again, you can't just look at one set of stats. If you look at prosecutions, it can be discouraging. If you look at the human trafficking hotline number, they look at the number of calls that come in, which again, that tells you, you know, if a state like New Jersey has a lot of pings on the, like every year they publish a state by state report and there's a map of the US and it has little red pings indicating the percentages of, or the numbers of calls that state called. So New Jersey has like so many of these little pings. And so someone could look at that map and say, you know, that New Jersey, there's a problem there. But actually, that means people are reporting and aware, where places like Montana, where they have less population density, you think, well, there's no ping there. You know, there's not a report there or a call there that year. That doesn't mean there's not human trafficking. In fact, there's human trafficking in every state. And in fact, every state that has a truck stop, I guarantee you, very young children are sold in those places. So, so when we talk about stats and all of that information, it's important for us to understand the context. So, so we're going to talk right now about the 4 categories that aren't covered under the human trafficking law, just to make you aware, because these things do have expressions and actualities in the United States. So the first one we're going to talk about is forced child marriage. This is something that we thought just happened in other countries when our human trafficking statute was created. And it's something that the UN knew about for a long time. But no one really wanted to approach it because it was presumed that, you know, it only affected certain cultures. And but right here in 2016, we made our first law about this, our international policy about this. And Samantha Powers actually, she brought this up with force at the UN to say, hey, this is a problem, and we're standing in solidarity with children. But back then, the thought was, again, there were nearly 100 nations where this was legal, and almost all of those nations were part of the United Nations. Some of them were on the Human Rights Commission. So this was sort of the elephant in the room no one would address. But we didn't know. Our nation didn't identify that this was actually legal in the United States through a loophole in the court system. And so state by state, in the family court system, young children, because of an exception, young children, some states had no minimum age, were forced to marry adults. So state by state, they're closing that loophole legislatively. Delaware was the first state. New Jersey was number 2. During the pandemic, Pennsylvania and one more state joined on. And so little by little, they're changing this reality. Why is this tied to human trafficking? We use the term human trafficking, modern day slavery, because this is quite literally a means of sex and labor enslavement. Like I mentioned, the individuals, some states had no minimum age. And so, for example, the face of the legislation in Florida was someone that was raped by the deacon in her church at the age of 9. Then at 11, she was impregnated, and then she was forced to marry him. So this is something that people didn't want to really address because they thought it just highlighted certain groups of people. But we've had cases in the US of people of all faiths, from, we've had Jewish situations, Amish, Mormon, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, people of no faith. This is something that has gone on. And, this isn't a matter of religious liberties because no faith requires that. And so this is just a child protection issue. This is an enslavement issue. The very difficult thing about this area is before the state laws are changed, what typically happened if a girl runs away in this situation, and all the cases I know of are girls, what happens is, we have systems. They don't have a voice in the court system. They don't, because they're minors. It's interesting to think they can sign one of the most binding contracts in the United States, and they don't have a voice in the court system. So this is, a lot of victims would run away. They would go to service providers or to community leaders, and the laws have them tied because police, law enforcement would have to give them back to the social services of that state. Social services would send them to their parents oftentimes, and the parents would send them back to their spouses. And so this was a particularly egregious, this was the bleed that we needed to stop. It's not the majority of kinds of modern day slavery in the US, but it is the legal form. So we're changing those laws little by little. A lot of these victims end up committing suicide because they don't have hope. They don't have a way out. And so we are mobilizing on that particular area. 3 other categories of human trafficking, modern day slavery that are not covered in our law is forced child begging with intentional maiming. Forced begging might look more like labor trafficking, but this is unique because there's intentional maiming. So we see this especially in tourist areas in other nations. So someone that is handicapped in some way or blind or in a wheelchair would garner more funds and more donations, and those all go to the trafficker. And then the other category is forced child soldiers. We have some nations that conscript children, and some nations that have contra organizations like Joseph Kony's organization in the Congo, who they would abduct children and force them to be soldiers, and take them through a lot of trauma. Sometimes they were even forced to kill their own parents. I want to challenge you. We don't have that in the US, but we do have organizations that force children to be soldiers, and the children aren't just able to leave. We see that, and we have that in our gang communities. And so I think it's just a different kind of perspective to look at an issue that the city of Newark and all cities across the US and communities are addressing. But it is a way of enslavement, because if they want to leave, they can't. Of course, gangs become like family and community. So it's that grooming process as well. It's that bonding, but it's also the abuse in there as well, the fear, that's part of it. And then the third one that's not part of our human trafficking law is organ trafficking. We have our own law. We've had cases of organ trafficking in New Jersey, but this is the sale of parts of people. We all know, there are certain parts of our bodies that we can live without, and they're non-vital. There are places on this globe today where people are being raised like cattle to harvest those vital organs. So this is just something we have to be aware of, and if you're a person of prayer, be prayerful about, advocate for. Some nations, like I said, that are part of the United Nations have been accused of organ harvesting of people they have incarcerated. And so this is a real issue, a real live issue. That's not just something that's, we're beyond this. It's very much happening now. So also, we're going to talk about the most common, the most prolific form of modern day slavery, human trafficking, and this falls under our federal law and our state law. It's number 1 globally, it's number 2 in the US, and that is labor trafficking. Labor trafficking is, again, it looks like so many different things. So sometimes it is very hard to spot. There's a really cool website, it's called slaveryfootprint.org. And that website, it's an inquiry. It asks you a bunch of questions, and then at the end, it tells you how many slaves that you have working for you. Did you know you have slaves working for you? It's in everything. It's in the supply chain. In fact, the top 2 crops tied to human trafficking, tied to child human trafficking specifically, are chocolate and coffee. We have coffee industries in the US, we have chocolate industries in the US. So those, and I don't know about you, but I love my chocolate and my coffee. That website was created not to condemn us, but to challenge us to get that slavery footprint down. And so this is just something that we can do to make a positive change. Of course, legislatively, we've worked on things, but also it's very powerful when people choose to purchase fair trade certified. If you've noticed those little green labels on things, you can buy now, even in Aldi's, even in discount grocery stores, fair trade certified. And I can tell you, it doesn't matter if you buy your coffee, if your coffee costs $7 or if it costs 50 cents. I don't know if you can buy that for 50 cents anymore, but it doesn't matter. If it doesn't have that fair trade certified logo, it's not. So these are just real practical ways that we can make a difference. Still tied to cotton. It's not just tied to the materials and the global industries, but it's also tied to the manufacturing as well. So again, jeans. If your jeans that you buy, doesn't matter if you paid hundreds of dollars or $50 or $20 for a pair of jeans, if they're not part of the solution, they're usually part of the problem. So this awareness alone has shifted people to start paying attention and purchasing and changing that reality. But it's not just in the production globally. We had victims of labor trafficking right here in the US, right here in New Jersey. So for example, in South Jersey, it looks like a tomato farm. In Central Jersey, it looks like a contractor. Labor trafficking in Bergen County looks like a live-in on par, a live-in nanny, living domestic servant. In places like nail salons, it can actually be the person doing the nails, but also can be a victim sitting in the chair of sex trafficking who their pimp thinks they've done good, so they're rewarding them with getting their nails done. So these things can interact with all kinds of places, our restaurants. In Newark, there was a braiding salon that was tied to international trafficking and had teenagers braiding all day long. And it took a community member to spot that and say, hey, this isn't right. They should be in school. What's going on? And so again, that kind of advocacy that you see represented on this panel, that kind of advocacy to not just see something that you think is wrong or you're not sure, but actually to follow through and look into it can really save someone's life. So labor trafficking, we see that, there are issues in our country, there's been a lot of awareness, especially this past year, about our monuments and different things like that built by those who were enslaved. But did you know that some of the biggest buildings in the world that are being built now, and the societies now, and even government forced labor trafficking is happening in our world today? It is. We had a group in the Philippines we have a group of churches that we help equip them to do anti-trafficking. They opened up a survivor home a few years ago, and they've helped not just the victims of human trafficking in the Philippines, but there have been victims that were being trafficked in one particular one that was rescued from Saudi Arabia, and it was government sponsored labor trafficking. So this is a problem really that is everywhere. It affects so many cultures, and it affects us as well. And we can do something about it. The last form of human trafficking, modern day slavery that we're going to cover is sex trafficking. It's usually what we all think about when we talk about human trafficking. And so sex trafficking, again, like labor trafficking, it integrates into all kinds of industries, legal and illegal. So I just listed a few here, but again, it can be, anyone can be victim, boys, girls, LGBT community, anyone can be a victim of human trafficking. We've actually seen a situation where in Atlantic City, there was a sex trafficking victim who was in her 90s. So when I say it can be anyone, it really can be anyone. And it happens in, again, legal systems, right? Legal businesses. So pornography is the one thing that is tied to all parts of the grooming, luring, production, victimization, because I'll just we do whole talks just on pornography alone, but the vast majority of porn that is available today is what we call slave porn. The people in the images weren't free when they were made. And so, and then the number one tool used by traffickers and pedophiles to lure and groom and sexualize children, their victims, is pornography. And then there have been studies, even at Princeton, that shows that viewing pornography trains your brain to objectify humans in real life. And in our jails and prisons, it's among violent offenders, porn addiction is the most common thing. But it makes sense. If you train your brain to objectify someone, then it doesn't mean anything if you harm them. I love what Terry Crews, the actor, said when he describes his porn addiction, which there are a lot of YouTube videos that share his story. He said, you know, I began to see people as parts to be used instead of people to be loved, right? So when we objectify people, that's really what makes human trafficking possible, right? We're monetizing people, their parts, their services, and we're objectifying them and enslaving them. So this is that space. It creates that, and then it also creates addiction. Many states have declared porn addiction a health crisis. So what does that do to demand? Raises it. What does it do to victimization? Raises it. So just in the whole process, the whole cycle, pornography is part of that. So there's one well-known abolitionist, Christine Kane. She says, you know, you want to help end slavery or human trafficking, stop watching porn, right? Because it is part of that market, and it's part of that that tool. So it's something, again, that's a legal industry. And it used to be back in the day that in my lifetime, it was legal. Actually, the Playboy had centerfolds of 10-year-olds and articles by psychiatrists that told parents it was healthy to sexualize children and groom their infants, and told them how to. So we haven't had our porn laws very long, our child porn laws. We haven't had these ideas for very long. So it's important that we hold to them, because they've proved this sexualizing children early has proven to be very unhealthy. A lot of the trauma that we deal with has to do with this. In fact, a lot of traffickers say, I'm just picking up where daddy left off, right? And that's one of the indicators of, or one of the vulnerabilities to human trafficking. So that the most common vulnerability is just being young. And we talked about the typical age range, which when it starts. So it's a quarter of young people, like was mentioned, but they age, right? They're still being trafficked. But when it starts, for most of them, it's 11 to 14. So when we talk about prevention, that's why we speak in the middle schools and the high schools, especially, because those are the ages that are targeted. When I mentioned that growing scenario in schools where kids are being trafficked, I've had law enforcement that work in those schools that have said, Mandy, they're not even going after the high schools as aggressively. They're specifically targeting the middle school age girls, especially. Because, you know, if you remember, you know, when you're in middle school, you're very vulnerable. So, and then the second most common risk factor is simply is having been sexually violated. Since we started our good touch, bad touch conversation decades ago, that informs what we know now, which is 1 in 3 females and 1 in 5 males by the time they reach 18 will have been sexually violated, sexualized, raped. It's a long category, molested, But that's a lot of our population now. So it's important for us to recognize these risk factors, to recognize these vulnerabilities so we can help prevent. I appreciated the late Diana, Lady Flagg. She was a pastor's wife in Newark, and she would, every media opportunity she had, she would raise not just awareness about human trafficking, but about child molestation. These issues, like you said, it's sometimes we don't want to talk about it, but these are really issues that we need to talk about it, because it gives context for someone to learn about wait, this isn't normal. Because a lot of times that grooming process makes you think it's normal because my body's responding, or it's also, there's that manipulation to make you think it's your fault, right? So with the human trafficking conversation, it's very similar to the sexual abuse conversation, which it's not normal, it's not your fault, and there is help. So that's an important part of what we do, and we talk to young people about. So right here, how I met my trafficker, New Jersey students, 11 to 14. If you guys can look through that, those are all situations where I have assisted child victims of human trafficking, and the places they met their trafficker. Literally job fairs with legitimate businesses. We've had that situation. At the mall, an app, sleepover, foster parent. With the foster care system, when we build a response from prevention all the way to reentry, we equip churches to become foster parents to help this vulnerable population. Sometimes they're fostering generally, sometimes they're fostering the children of women who are in our survivor home. But it's a great space for the community to get involved. And as was mentioned about COVID, abuse reports went up. For the first time in the history of our nation, more children reported abuse than adults. So there were all kinds, and part of the abuse also included human trafficking. And we saw a human trafficking roll from happening in hotels and those kind of common places. Hotels were shutting down, to homes, because kids were online. And a lot of them were unsupervised, so they were victimized in that way, that grooming process. And then also at home by yourself, it makes it very easy to become a victim of human trafficking that way. So we saw all this kind of, we had predicted it, the FBI predicted it, but we watched it unfold, and abuse went up, all sorts of, and then the resources went down. Right now we have Can Abolition Advocate, our church-based leaders, in the docket to be trained for foster care, because over the last year we've stopped training because of COVID foster care. So the demand for more foster care has gone up, and the resources have diminished. They're at capacity in just about every state. And then add to that the situation at the border, where there's so many minors unaccompanied, and systems are scrambling to safely house children. And so even though we're not a border state, states have been tapped to say, hey, do you have any, and they're calling everybody who's ever been a foster parent to say, do you have, an open bed? You're already vetted, let's go forward, because there's such a need. So there's a need for our own US children, but there's also a need for these children at the border as well. So this is a space that if you've ever been a foster parent, reach out and help get your process so you can get in. And this is a space also that we want to make sure we get functioning again in our state, because like I said, our abolition advocates have said we are ready to go. We have families ready to go to be trained, but they just haven't been able to go through the system. So hopefully that will change very soon, as so many things have opened up in this last week. So again, this is a lot of information about the negative. But now we're going to talk about what you can do. And that's what CAN is all about. It's about how we can change this. And we've seen, as people have stepped up, we've seen people change this in powerful ways. In fact, I just want to show a quick video about what happened during, because it was very difficult to function for all of our agencies during COVID. So I just wanted to give a little testimonial video here. Let me just go on down. Let's hold on to that. I'll show you the testimony video in a minute, and we'll go into Q&A. So what can you do? If you're a person of faith, you can pray. Literally, if you can pray, pick an hour once a week to go to our social media feeds. canfreedom.org social media feeds are on our website. You can click on those, or it's at can.abolition, and just take an hour, go and inform your prayer, buy those posts. Every post is for prayer. We have seen miracles happen as people pray. Also, there are so many ways that you can get involved and use your skills, use what you love to end what you hate. We have bankers who are using their skills to bring awareness, to train our survivors for education, employment reentry. We've got, and then also spotting the indicators within their purchasing systems of the purchasing patterns of traffickers and victims to put red flags into their systems. We have healthcare, of course, law enforcement, teachers are spotting victims of human trafficking. And we've got pottery artists that use their skill for Bible-based art therapy in our survivor home, and tattoo artists who volunteer some of their time to cover up the brandings that oftentimes traffickers will brand their victims with. So there are a lot of places that we can make a difference. But it's really important we spot a victim in our midst, because like I said, it's not always obvious who a victim is. And so I just want you to take a look real quick at this. This is specifically for sex trafficking. These are really common signs. So unexplained injuries, we see a lot in the hairline, because if you're selling beauty and sex, you want them to look pretty, right? So we'll see blunt force trauma in the head area where it can't be detected as easily. And then of course, so you see sometimes some of the trauma you see in the emergency room, you see in different places in context of the community. Branding or tattoos, like I mentioned. Sorry, I gotta just pull this up so I can see. And then hotel keys, rolls of cash, multiple phones, or refillable gift cards. We see that quite a bit. Then we see, sexually provocative clothing, not appropriate to, the weather or the age of the person. You can see a sudden change in a kid in even your child or a kid in your community. All of a sudden they start hanging out with the wrong kind of people, and they start showing signs that they're disengaging from their friends, they're disengaging from school. It may not just be getting into trouble or drugs, which drugs are also tied to human trafficking. And in fact, drugs themselves, sometimes victims become addicts and get involved in drugs because they're trying to cope with their trauma, but sometimes the traffickers use drugs as a chemical restraint. So they will often cause the people they're targeting to become addicted so they can control them, and that so they will return to their victims or to their traffickers. Also, someone that's being controlled, never allowed to be alone, someone's always speaking for them or watching them. It's not just always the pimp, it can be someone that's spotting them. And again, like I said, the cell phone, someone texting every 15 minutes, where are you, what's going on? A lot of times victims aren't even able to look in the eye of the people. So just again, those signs of being controlled, those are part of the problem. Oops, sorry. I don't know why this is, apologize, I'm just trying to pull this down so I can move the screen to the next one. All right, one of the tools I recommend, because it's not always obvious that someone is a victim of human trafficking. Covenant House, which you have right there in Newark, they created 4 questions that had over an 80% success rate for identifying both sex and labor victims in the population they serve. If you're not familiar with Covenant House, they house homeless young adults, so 18 to 21 age. So this is actually a tool that could be used broadly, but it was specifically tested for this particular group. But it's interesting because you don't have to have any kind of special training to administer the questions or interpret the answers. If someone says yes to any part of these questions, they are a victim of human trafficking. So then you're informed, okay, I can respond again appropriately to my profession. If you're in healthcare, of course, that looks different because of HIPAA laws. If you're a clergy or you have, those kind of restrictions as far as what you can say that's reported to you in confidence, but reporting appropriately. In the state of New Jersey, if it's a minor, every state actually is a mandatory reporting state. So we have to report child abuse, and this is a form of child abuse, human trafficking is. So what else can you do? Like I mentioned, we're giving schools those hotline numbers to post everywhere. And that's something you can help advocate, make sure your schools are doing that. We have our current missing and exploited children posters in all 50 states. Since January, 433 missing and exploited children have been found from our posters because we added the digital element to our search and rescue. We've never seen numbers like this. It's amazing to see as the community, as churches, as the faith community are responding, they're praying for these profiles, they're sharing them, and one by one, these kids are being found. So we're getting ready to, some states have all of them found. So we are getting ready to relaunch every state's posters in June. So we can co-brand with you. If you want to do a physical outreach, reaching your hotels and motels, truck stops, you're just giving the posters to the staff. That's a great way to make a difference. And that's, again, a lot. When we did in 2019, we reached every hotel and motel in the state in one day with our statewide hotel outreach. And in that, people at the staff from the hotels that are receiving the posters, they're the ones, I just saw this kid's here. Again, things are happening because the community became that catalyst to make it happen. And you can be part of that. And when we did our statewide hotel outreach, we actually had churches in Newark and the community, you all were part of it. So it was amazing.
Wow.
And we train a point person from a church to be a can abolition advocate, leaders. Here's a picture of one of our Newark churches, Central Assembly right there. They were helping prep our tools, our self-rescue tools. So you are an important part in preventing, detecting, ending, and healing human trafficking. So with that, I'll just open it up to questions. We have a lot
So we have a process, Dr. Leverett, and we have, of course, Director Keisha Uri and Senior Manager Andrea Mason, who's going to take this part with you, with the panelists, as panelists, to go further in this conversation. I want to thank our host, Desiree Hadley, along with the communications department, for doing all that they did to help bring this to our viewers and listening audience. We thank you, Desiree, for your work and your dedication on this Saturday morning. The Bible does declare that too much is given, much is required, but they always leave out that word committed. God doesn't just give us stuff, Keisha, because he don't have nobody else to give it to. He gives it to those, Andrea and Dr. Leverett, that are committed. And we're committed to doing all of this. So I'm going to turn it over now to Director Keisha, because we know that things throughout the community, we have a Black and brown community. We have people that are targeted differently. And Director Keisha is going to handle her part. And then Andrea will kick in and do what she does. And then they will then formally conclude the event for today. I thank you so much and look forward to this conversation going further. Thank you all that tuned in. It is now in the hands of Director Keisha and Andrea Mason.
Thank you so much, Mandy, for all of the wealth of information that you provided for us. And I was like listening attentively. I'm like screenshotting, trying to get the information. And the information certainly raised, the red flags and all of those things that we get to see for our young people and for parents and for the community members to be able to take a look at. Certainly, I did a workshop for people at the airports, right? The flight attendants and airport staff, for them to know the signs to look out for, especially because they get trafficked all the time on the airplanes and people don't pay attention. And so some of the things that stood out for me, the organ trafficking, the gang members, a form of trafficking where gang members are not allowed to leave the gangs, and they have to do things in order to leave the gangs. And so many of our, in the city of Newark, right, and other cities, right, nationally have these, issues and problems, but we only see human trafficking as a girl being trafficked sexually by like a pimp or prostitution. But we miss the signs in other places. So I certainly thank you for all of the different areas that you were able to point out to us. Andrea, do you have questions that are coming from the Facebook that we want to take?
Sure. So actually, what's interesting is everybody on the Facebook feed that's commenting is just talking about how great this information is,
Right.
how much of a wealth of knowledge it is. And what's interesting is one person actually made a comment, and it's really my sentiments exactly about how much, unfortunately, this seminar isn't attended. And, you know, it'll be shared, I'm sure, in days and hours to come. But you know, I guess because of stigma or whatever the reason is, why there's so many people that aren't tuned into this much needed education. You know, we, like everybody is aware of it, but I don't know how much they actually know.
Mhm.
You know, and just the information that Reverend Mandy shared, like I'm just so grateful that I was a part of it, and I'm definitely going to be speaking it up, you know, in the near future. I'll be with some youth this afternoon and just asking some general questions because, you know, you mentioned that the target age typically is that 11 to 14-year olds, and those are the ones that I'm usually around. And I can start, you know, listening out for buzzwords and looking out for signs, and they talk to their peers. So, you know, I can start, you know, just putting it out there and making them aware so that they'll feel comfortable in talking to me and sharing information. But the few questions that I do have, because not really, I didn't really see any specific from Facebook. Actually, here's one. The young boys are running around the dealers' impacts. Are they also targets? So I think that speaks to Director Yuri's point about the gangs and drug affiliation. Would that be considered human trafficking?
So what I mentioned about the gangs being like forced child soldiers, that aspect is not covered in our state or federal law as far as human trafficking. But where it does, if they are being sex or labor trafficked, so our law specifically covers that. When it comes to other issues, that sometimes again like child endangerment, those spaces are where additional people can be charged for other things, and in case of young people. I wanted to mention that we have can abolition advocates throughout the state. Our goal is for every community to have their own trainer locally. They do it free of charge for schools, for community, for anybody. Right now we're doing a lot of Zooms because of COVID, but we have people everywhere, and they're there to serve. I know Pastor Paul, you've done outreaches, and you know we help when we retrofit existing services. We've had people right there in Newark, churches with their food pantries, their church-based serving victims of human trafficking. We've had some victims re-entering New Jersey, even Newark, from other states, and needing basic things like uniforms for their child, or you know, and furniture and other things. And I know that different networks. I know Pastor Paul with the Hope Ministries and your affiliates, you help mobilize people to get those resources. So we kind of work in a safe way. We don't have the label human trafficking on what we do locally because it creates that natural camouflage that's safe. So the community is already doing so much in violence, in trauma, but also in very practical areas for human trafficking. So again, if people want to go further, we can help your church, your community go further. We do professional trainings. Like, for example, they're on all categories of human trafficking within all 12 categories of the law. We've trained Seton Hall Law Society right there in Newark to identify human trafficking, even within like maritime law. There are indicators for human trafficking. So we have one of our can abolition advocates work for airline ambassadors, and so we have a vast array of our professionals that can help do trainings anywhere in the state and anywhere in the nation. We can do that through Zoom. We opened up in 7 additional states.
So Reverend Mandy, just want to add, because I do have a few more questions, and I know there is an attendee or a viewer saying that, you know, this information is so great, and we definitely want to make sure that we rebroadcast it constantly on our local government access channel, which is NORC TV. So we'll definitely be doing that. You know, just the more and more you speak, I'm just like, oh my gosh, everybody should know this information. We also have just, you know, all of the comments are just about how great this information is, and people really want to be involved. So you're mentioning, you know, some of the efforts that have taken place, but somebody that may not be affiliated with one of the churches, how do you become either a CAN ambassador, or just how do they learn how to do some of the outreach personally, or must they be latched into an organization that's already affiliated?
Well, you can be part. There so many of our outreaches and mobilizations. You don't have to be affiliated necessarily in any way. Like the missing children's poster that we're getting ready to launch. You can be a church. You can be an organization. I know we talked about co-branding with the municipality. We just put your logo there, and then you mobilize your people to go and just give these tools to professionals. You can host a training before you send out teams. You can make it as formal or as informal as you want. But that's something that's a great resource. We've got people actually doing street outreaches to those that are prostituted right there in Newark on a monthly basis. And we've had churches right there in Newark prep like the gift bags and the different items that they need to build that rapport, because you're building relationships. A lot of times people are that are being victimized are really, they've been traumatized, so they're really skeptical of anybody, you know, law enforcement or even people coming preaching in their organization, or so they create a situation where like, hey, we're just here for you, you know. And we have the same thing with strip club outreaches. But again, reaching the vulnerability, the vulnerable areas, children, any kind of ministry or outreach you do to help kids be safe out of the school time, in all those spaces, that's a great space to make a difference. And in your where you have individuals from other nations, especially in the Latino population, a lot of times traffickers will let their, especially labor trafficked victims, go to their church, go to their synagogue, go to, you know, where they're, wherever they worship, because they recognize culturally that's something very valuable to them. So you might have someone sitting in your congregation, in your school, and wherever you're serving, where they're being victimized, but they're keeping their mouth shut. Something like that 4 question, if you have that in your process, it helps you spot people and get help a lot more quickly.
So another thing, you know, someone mentioned, you know, hands off our women, girls, youth, having a hands off our women, girls, and youth task force. But I want to make sure that it's clear that it's not just females. Males are also involved. And Reverend Mandy, you didn't really answer the question directly, but I think what I got from your answer is individuals, you know, as sincere and passionate as they may be, it's better or easier if they do link with an organization or a church that's already doing this type of outreach, because we're stronger in numbers.
Yeah, it's great to join with something that's already existing, but we can also help when we train like our CAN abolition advocates, we train them, vet them. It's a pretty intensive thing, but they also have the accountability of their overseeing organization, and we help give them best practices, and we mentor them to build what they want to build. Sometimes people can cause more harm when they do something that they don't have expertise in, and they can cause you know, all kinds of, even add trauma. The anti-trafficking community can become exploitive. And so we help coach people doing anti-trafficking ministries or outreaches, and or to not become part of the problem. So in that way, we can help an organization design what they want to do. We advise for free because we want to make sure we're learning from best practices. We collaborate broadly, and what we've learned is organizations that start and then they don't learn what other organizations are doing. A lot of times they make those rookie mistakes because they're recreating wheels that exist, and it's okay to do something from scratch, but you can learn from so many others and then not repeat those mistakes and follow those best practices.
So I do have 4 questions, but Director Yuri, did you want to chime in?
I did want to chime in just to kind of say that this information is valuable, and many people don't take it in until it lands on their doorsteps. And one of the things that I just want to share is that just recently, Reverend Roundtree shared briefly about one of our colleagues and brothers in the community whose daughter was kidnapped and murdered, and she was 15. And we were in very true reactionary mode, right? She went missing on April the 5th. and she was discovered on April the 27th. Like about 22 to 25 days she had been missing. And we found that law enforcement didn't have a sense of urgency around it. The bureaucracy and the red tape that's around it. Oh, it's just a missing person. Oh, it's a runaway. If the person has a background of running away, they're very dismissive around the sense of urgency. When we went looking for her, and we did all of the things very grassroots. We went to the hotels, we went to the strip clubs, we went to the local clubs, to friends' houses, neighborhoods. We had missing person signs. We went to the media. We did everything that we could possibly do. And we found that we getting the information out was valuable, because people was like, oh, this girl is missing. And then the word was out. And then we found a young man who said, I saw that girl at a house party the other day, and she was like incoherent and high, and someone was soliciting her, trying to sell her. And not true, not sure if the information was true or not, if she was the right person or whatever it is, but he was a college student, and he said they have these underground house parties that you can only get invited to, and they ultimately become like sex parties. And he said, yeah, they were selling her at this party. And the father was like, no, that's not possible. I think something else is going on. And so just knowing the possibilities, we were going underground. We were dressing up like we was teenagers, little kids, trying to get into these parties and clubs just so that we can see if we can identify her. So we were calling friends. So just the work that goes into it is tremendous. And then ultimately, we found that she, was murdered, heinously murdered. She was shot, 11 times. And there was a groomer here, her friend that she had met in a group home was a groomer, right? And grooming is different. She lured her out and lured her into, the situation. And these groomers are very patient, and they'll wait you out. And we just have to know the manipulation and the tactics that they use. Like you said, they'll befriend you. They're getting paid, or they themselves are being trafficked or being held. And they become groomers to groom other, young girls. So this is tremendous. And had I not experienced it, or had to be a part of the search parties and talking to law enforcement from state to state, and realizing that the law enforcement entity is broken around this issue of sex trafficking, human trafficking, missing persons, all of these things, because they're very dismissive about it, and I'm very outraged about it.
I would just add to that, probably the thing I repeatedly, when a parent is run into the very same thing that you were expressing, we ran into it 2 years ago, and I had to mobilize people over 3,000 miles away for one of our teenage people in our family, actually 2 of them. And same thing, it was the same situation. They were Snapchat friended, and parents dropped them off at the local mall, right? The suburban mall. It wasn't anything that they were concerned about, a normal thing that teenagers do. Traffickers go in all of those normal spaces. And so they met these people, they were friends, they were on social media, Snapchat, and then they ended up drugging them, and then taking them to the major city next to them, and trafficking them. And my niece, the individual, broke away, but the other person with her didn't. It was the same situation at 2 different municipalities. And so one municipality law enforcement handled it one way, because the parents said, no, she's not a runaway. And then the other municipality convinced the parent that, well, they met up willingly, right? They didn't, this whole scenario wasn't a willing scenario. So one of the resources that we highlight all the time whenever parents come to us for missing children is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is available to even kids that are identified as runaways. They will help. So sometimes if your law enforcement aren't helping right away, you can help not just be mobilized yourself, but mobilize broadly. We use all of those missing children posted from NCMEC. It's shortened into NCMEC, but that's 1-800 the missing. So if you're a parent, if you're in a situation where you have a loved one that is missing, 1-800 the missing. and they'll create a profile. They are the gold standard when it comes to this, because unfortunately when media put it out there, sometimes they don't update, and you can have a kid found and 2 years later they're still up there and people are sharing, and so that discredits the movement. And people are like, I don't want to share it, you don't know if that's really done. They update. They have permission from the legal guardian to, you have to be the legal guardian to put the information out there. And so they have the most updated picture. They have the current casework, the legal casework number. They have all of that information, all the, like I couldn't legally share a picture of a minor on social media. We have a policy even not to do that because we want to protect kids. But these profiles are specific for this purpose, and available for a certain time. And they have all the legal approval. So, but that's a great resource. And like I said, you don't have to be, it can be a kid that's considered a runaway and you have help. And one of the things that also creates a buffer, if it's a family member, you kind of see when people are going through stuff, if they're ever in the media looking for their child, the hate they receive. People are trolling and trying to dismantle the work of finding a missing child, believe it or not. It's really awful. So the more attention you get, the more the hate comes. And you're already as a family traumatized from what you're trying to do. You're sleepless, you're trying to find your kid, and then the haters are coming and trying to dismantle that. So this kind of creates a buffer, right? You're working with the gold standard. You don't have to keep proving who you are or what you're doing or that you're legitimate. And also there have been traffickers or abusers who have used media and social media to find the ones they were victimizing. And so if you're sharing, you're actually helping that. So you want to make sure you're sharing from a credible organization and it's safe. And so that the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is the gold standard.
So thank you. We only
so
have
much for
about,
that. And Andrea, before you go to your last piece, I just wanted to also raise the point of how Black and Brown children are treated very differently. And that's a real point of how, they're not, these cases are not taken as serious. And I'm probably saying that as a bias, but I certainly, would like to put that out in terms of maybe a question. How do you feel like in Black and Brown communities, the sex trafficking, human trafficking issues are handled?
I think in every community, whatever the standard of thinking in a community, if it's a highly sexualized community, I've seen people justify little girls dancing provocatively in not the Black and Brown community, but a different community, and saying, well, that's just cultural. I think we have to address that what's normal, like cultural norms. Also the vulnerabilities, if we're in communities that have a lot of fatherlessness, I think that makes a big difference. I grew up by a single mom, and my abusers and people came into my life because she was a single mom. So sometimes it just, those kind of natural protections, the front lines for protection of a child is a healthy family, right? So if there's breakdown there, but yeah, and then you've got again, if the family or the culture doesn't trust law enforcement or had bad experience with law enforcement, it's hard to work with law enforcement. And so, I know in Newark, there's a lot of community outreach with law enforcement working in partnership together. So I think that's just a big thing to unpack, and it's been a big part of the conversation in the last year and a half. Yeah, but I would affirm, one of the things, Ari, that was really telling is you can look at the missing and exploited children, like the missing or the victims of trafficking in any given state, and states that have very low populations of Black and Brown have higher populations of Black and Brown represented on those missing children, on the exploited. So it's a big question. What is causing that? I think there are many factors, and I think it's multifaceted. I think we need to address all of them.
we only have about 6 minutes left to the session, and I still have the 4 questions, some of which can be answered in one word. But I do want to just let our observers, attendees, folks watching know that we'll have the contact information pinned on Facebook. So if you want to go back to review afterwards, the information will be there for you. The 800 number for the missing, and then also the hotline for those that may be, or for the information for those that may be involved in human trafficking. So just want to state, the first question was, is prostitution a form of human trafficking? And of course, we have gone through that now, knowing that it is a form of the sex trafficking.
Correct. But they're not all prostitution. It falls under that statute. You have to do, again, prove force, fraud, or coercion, except for in the case of minors. If a minor, someone under the age of 18 is being sex trafficked, they are all automatically categorized as a victim of human trafficking. So a lot of times it's easier for law enforcement to make their case in that situation.
Thank you. The other, you mentioned the Walter Hoving home that they have one in New Jersey. And this actually is my question. I've heard of it for substance abuse recovery. So how can one affected by human trafficking take advantage of those services? Would they call there if they're trying to get out, or is it once they're out, like for recovery?
It's a residential service provision, and then they also have additional services, and people volunteer and work for the organization and are trained for leadership. But it's a residential. Typically it's a year-long residential service provision. They do have a 6-month track, and if you're a good fit for the program, they'll put you. You don't have to have insurance or any kind of thing. So if you know someone struggling, they deal with addiction, but also all kinds of life-controlling issues. So like I said, for over 50 years, they specifically have helped victims of human trafficking in New Jersey, to the point where I know I've heard of in Camden. They'll do, before we had a New Jersey location, the New York location, the law enforcement would refer to the New York location because it was so successful. We actually have whole nonprofits started and doing outreach to the streets in Camden by our graduates. So it's amazing to see the lives that are changed, and then they're going out and helping and rescuing others.
Yes, I've heard nothing but wonderful things about the Walter Hoving House, and I may be saying it improperly, but yes, I've heard great things about it. So you also mentioned that there was a stat that I'd like you to repeat. It was about youth that have been sexualized prior to their 18th birthday. It was like 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 for males and females.
Yeah, so 1 in 3 females, so that's 33% of females is what they've got so far. So have been sexually violated. So that's a vulnerability. And then 1 in 5, so 20% of males. So that and that creates a vulnerability pool. But there are all kinds of other vulnerabilities, but those are the most common: homelessness, food insecurity, all sorts of things. So we help the community build a response to mitigate those in the name of human trafficking. Sometimes we don't recognize that the foster adopt issue and those that have anything to do with human trafficking. A lot of times we don't see that the strip club outreaches, or that we just think, oh, that's something different. That's legal. But sometimes strip clubs are where people go and then they meet a trafficker. Sometimes it's where they go where there are hubs that are known for trafficking. Young children will be in the strip clubs. And so we see it all along the way. Sometimes it's where they go after because they feel like they can't do anything more because they've been so objectified. So our strip club outreaches don't go in the name of human trafficking, but they just say, hey, we're here for you. And, there might be a domestic violence issue, whatever. So they work kind of like social workers, really adaptable social workers, unofficial social workers.
And the last question, before I turn it back over to Reverend Roundtree to officially close us out, is, are there any stats on dating services being used for trafficking? Now, I know a lot of times, they pride themselves on being safe and secure and going through all of this background stuff. But when you mentioned the woman relocating to New Jersey to meet her fiance, I was just like, online dating. How often, or are there any stats regarding those services?
I haven't heard any credible stats. The statistic question is we don't have enough unified stats that I feel comfortable with quoting, but it is a real issue. Anywhere you meet someone, it's a stranger. An organization that's hosting can only do so much. We have found organizations that we had to amend the Communications Decency Act to make the laws stick to online companies, because they were knowingly coaching traffickers to say, hey, this is a minor, you could literally order someone online like pizza. But for the most part, any kind of platform that hosts relationships, that builds relationships, they can only go so far, just like, a background check. Not every pedophile has been caught yet. So it's an unknown number. Even if an organization kept their own stats, it wouldn't be all organizations together. So there's a serious lacking in stats, but some businesses do. They want to be proactive and they do their own stats. So I don't have a solid answer for you on that, but it is an area of awareness, and everywhere, be safe.
Yes.
When you meet a stranger, you don't know who that person is.
Well, I'd like to thank you specifically, Reverend Mandy, for just sharing this information. It definitely is something that our community and others, everyone in the country needs to be made aware of. I can only hope that, everyone becomes informed about this entire thing that we call human trafficking. It has so many levels and so many characteristics, some of which we can identify, others that we can't. But I think through education, we can become more observant and help the cause of trying to end it, if there will ever be such a thing. At this time, I would like to just thank all that were involved in the planning of it, specifically the Interfaith Clergy Alliance and those individuals working directly with Reverend Roundtree. Of course, Director Yuri for her expertise and leading the Office of Violence Prevention and Trauma Recovery, which will indeed have some effect on this area directly, hence the reason why she was a part of the program today. And Reverend Roundtree, not sure if you have some closing remarks, but I'm really just saying thank you to everybody for your willingness to participate, specifically the attendees who are on Facebook. Please share this information. It definitely will be on NORC TV. As I mentioned earlier, we will post the information, the hotline, and other numbers that are imperative to this mission in the chat. And Reverend Roundtree, all yours.
Just a minute. I'm so sorry. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Well, somebody's trying to block me, and I'm trying to get to a street dedication. I love you all. I thank you. You've done a marvelous job. Keisha Yuri, Dr. Mandy, I'm sure this is not the end of what we're going to be doing. This is not it. It's not over. So I thank God for you. Hold on, I'm trying to.
I think we know Reverend Roundtree's sentiments. She's
yes,
going.
yes. I told you guys to end it. I love you. God bless you. And I will see you guys on the next go round. God bless you. It's now back in your hands, Andrea.
Thank you very much. Everyone have a blessed day. We look forward to more of these type of workshops and information sessions. And just remember, mask up, get those vaccines if you so choose, and just be on the lookout. This is really about saving our country, not necessarily just youth, children, boys, girls, women, saving our country. Thank you. Have a great day.